when you have that kind of commonality, it's very easy to understand, like, okay, my success is their success, right? If
Hmm.
they have this objective, if we can build this for them, innovate with them, it's not just good for the transactional relationship of like, hey, we were able to build something useful, but it
Yeah.
actually means something for them and their organization, that their
Yeah.
team gets to grow and live another day. And I think that's what everybody in the ecosystem wants to see, is these things kind of metastasize, stick around for periods of time beyond just the single cycle.
We are here live in Austin, Texas. I'm with Rich Widmann of Google. You lived in New York for a little bit, or you were up
I
there
did,
quite a
yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah.
So we've met each other a few times now over the years, but excited to finally get this going. I know we've been talking about it for a while, and
It's
so
been a long time coming, but
yeah.
this is probably the best time to do it because we're at consensus, and since when did we meet? In the fall? A lot's happened since then.
And no, so we'll talk a little bit about what Google's doing. So you have a pretty prolific background, right? You started off as a teacher, then you went into law, and then you went into Google and are now leading kind of the Web3 head of strategy. What was that like founding that initial team? Because Google's such an enormous company, right?
My whole life, I've had a passion for educating, right? So that's how I got started teaching, and frankly, it's one of the reasons I became a lawyer, because a lot of times what you're doing as a lawyer, particularly if you're a good litigator, is you're educating your clients, or kind of giving
Hmm.
them the options. And when I came to Google, that was very much kind of the persona I leaned into, was educating. And by that time, I had already built a little crypto business at my prior practice. So when I joined Google, there was this grassroots passion for crypto, which I was actually shocked at, because at the time you didn't really hear anything about Google or Google Cloud and crypto. And so I spent a lot of my time educating
Yeah.
and walking people through this. And it just sort of dawned on me after a while that we could actually get a collection of these folks together and start thinking about what it looks like to get into this space. We'll talk about this more, but naturally, one of the key areas has been on the infrastructure side of
Right.
things. That's the biggest pain point for everybody that we've talked to. And so naturally, we sat it within Google Cloud, and I think it's been quite fun, but still a lot of educating that goes on with the developer community within our own organization as
Yeah.
well. So
Is there like a crypto club that people start to kind of incubate almost internally, or?
I mean, the first collection of Googlers self-organized that were interested in crypto.
Mhm.
Obviously, this started with Bitcoin, and it sort of almost tilled the earth to create what our team became today, right? Just folks who are interested in the technology. It's an engineering
Right.
organization, right? So, like, very much a lot in line with the crypto ethos in terms of focus on builders and developers and things like revolutionary technology. And so, yeah, it started out as a crypto club. We actually have like a Web3 crypto Googlers, channel. There's hundreds of people in it,
Right.
and it's now funny to watch how, when I first joined Google, that was really just a place for people to talk about price and just, hey, what do people think of this new protocol? And have you
Mhm.
heard about this new EIP? And now it's like a combination of product feedback from our team,
Yeah.
as well as all of the other kind of normal crypto babble that you like to see there. So
Yeah.
it's been really interesting to see that evolution.
So crypto obviously moves super, super fast, right? It's a lot of small startups. There's a handful of names that everyone recognizes if you're not in the space. Google is a name that sticks out, right? And so there must be, you guys have like great power comes great responsibility, in the sense of you guys have all the resources in the world probably to put behind different projects. But at the same time, do you guys ever struggle, or was that hard for you initially? Any public company is going to have some red tape. It's a massive ship you're steering. So is it challenging at times to make some innovations or changes?
Our main focus has been on the cloud side. And I think when we think about even that organization, it's a massive org. Staying ahead of the curve in crypto is the challenge. There were a couple things that we did when we built the team that goes back to Google's roots and is in line with the crypto ethos, which is there really isn't anyone on the team who can afford to just be off somewhere building in a
Mhm.
silo.
Right.
We're incredibly forward facing. It's not just folks like me who are talking, but it's also the head of our engineering org and the nominal head of the business, James Tromans. We've got our PMs that are out there. And the reason is you cannot build good products in the space that are knowing where your customers are going without
Mhm.
actually engaging with them. So if you're
Right.
just reading, BCG paper about
Right.
where the next crypto boom is coming from, I think you'll end up kind of getting phased out pretty quickly.
As Google, right, you're getting everyone's search history. So are you guys able to like then establish trends of like what's the next thing coming up? Like almost how Amazon will find like the best products and then they'll kind of create their own brand around it, or grocery stores do that too. Like, Is that something that Google is able to then see what those next trends are going to look like?
Yeah, so I can't speak for search. Here's what I will say is that like the culture of our team and just the company generally is deeply rooted in analytics and just
Hmm.
really understanding what are people doing with their time, what are they looking for, what are they interested in. And so a lot of the products and services that we build are established on top of that foundational data that we have. Frankly, a lot of it is not coming from the areas where I think the general public thinks they come from,
Right.
combing through search, but it actually comes from a lot of the on-chain data that we see. So when we look through GitHub repos, we look at like things like the Electric Capital report, like everyone else,
Hmm.
and sort of figure out, okay, like where are things going? Like one really interesting trend that we saw, and we kind of called this out very early on, is there was a really long time when developer adoption and crypto prices were directly correlating, right?
Hmm.
So token price goes up, developer count goes up. And there was a divorce from that in the last bear market where crypto prices went down.
Yeah.
Developer count actually stood steady. And that was a point that we made to our leadership internally, which is notice the change here. There's actually a foundational
Yeah.
set of developers that are going to continue to build, and that's where we should invest. So
Mm.
again, I think a lot of that data is open to everybody, but we certainly lean on having a data-driven approach when we think about who we build for and
Yeah.
what's worth building.
And it does feel like kind of we're living in this world where the floor keeps rising, across the board. I had a friend the other day. He's like, "Isn't Bitcoin dead?" And I'm like, "Dude, have you looked at the price recently? Like, we're pretty much at
Yeah.
the all-time highs." It is funny, this like public perception, and that's a lot of what we try to do on this podcast is like bring companies like Google who are on there and say, "Hey, your stock portfolio, a lot of the companies that are in there are actually using blockchain and they're starting to get involved." So I know that you mentioned a lot of the products you guys are building are around infrastructure. You guys mentioned, I was reading an old interview. I think you're calling it like a layer zero. For those that are not like super crypto native, what is layer zero? And then what other products are you guys kind of building right now?
Yeah, well, it's gotten tricky because there's now a company called Layer Zero that builds
Right.
interoperability
Okay.
protocols that we partnered with
I got it. Okay.
last year. But when we use that term, I think it was at Decrypt or maybe it was Masari mainnet. Really, what we wanted to instill in folks who are asking, well, what is Google Cloud's sort of objectives here? What are they going to build? The big focus for us was to essentially really focus at the base layer, right?
Mhm.
We know what we're good at.
Mhm.
And any large organization ought to do this when they lean into a new technology. It's actually kind of shocking because I think when most enterprises were getting into crypto, they did the opposite.
Right.
They were like a payments company. They're like, I'm going to reinvent culture. For us, it was how do we, not just for the team, but just for the developers that we serve, like how do we make sure that what we build is sticky and is differentiated?
Mhm.
It's on the infrastructure side. That was the clearest thing. It was like everyone we talked to hated running nodes.
Yep.
Everyone we talked to had problems with data. The pricing models for a lot of the RPC providers were also really like opaque. You have like,
Mhm.
these credits, and it's very confusing. And so that's when we said, okay, like what we're doing here is actually not in service of any one protocol or any subset of crypto developers, whether they be, Bitcoin or Ether or Solana focused. What we're kind of building here is like just a base layer for everybody. So that's a big focus for us, was to be seen as really protocol agnostic and focus on improving as much of the ecosystem, broadly speaking, as we possibly can.
Now, you were like one of the founding members within Google, in this team. And so would love to just hear kind of like how you guys have grown. When it was early stages, I think you mentioned it was one other person with you that started it, and then it has grown and evolved. And in any business organization, the dynamics start to change a little bit. So I'd love to just like hear what that's like.
Yeah, I think when I think about it, it really ties back to that like core community that existed. I don't think if there was a bedrock of people who found this really interesting
Mhm.
at Google, a lot of what happened would have happened, right?
Right.
Because so much of it was organic, right? When I started, I was like, oh, let me ask some questions. I mean, I was a lawyer at the time, right? So
Right.
like technically speaking, I had no idea what I was talking about on the technology side, right? I had an idea, an abstract idea enough to talk about the law. When it came to like, for example, the things that we focus on today, nodes and validators and data, those pain points were mostly invisible to me.
Mm.
And then it's only after I started engaging with their engineering and product org that I started to realize, wow, there are real issues. Not everyone's talking about the Howey test.
Right.
People are actually focusing on building really cool products and services. And so that I think it's probably one of the more thrilling things you can experience at a large company, which is to start something net new. Do you have to create buy-in and build things from scratch and start from zero? Absolutely. And do you need to build out a team of people who have different strengths that bring things to the table that you don't have? Yes. But if you can do that in a large company environment, I think it's actually one of the coolest things that you can do. And I think it's a generational opportunity, frankly,
Yeah.
that crypto provided.
No, I mean, it feels like that. I think I was telling you, I bought my first Bitcoin in like 2017.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing either. My friends, I was in Portugal and my friends were talking. I was like, what is this new Beanie Babies? Then I came home, someone turned around at a bar, was like, hey, you guys are talking Bitcoin. You got to get Ripple. And I started talking, now there's so many protocols where even someone that's in the space, I don't even know what half of them do. Right. And so, again, that's kind of what we do on this podcast. So you guys just, some of the bigger names, I think it was Polygon, Solana, Sui and Tezos, I believe, are the most recent ones that you guys just partnered with,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, and then we just announced partnership today with Phantom, where we're going to be
Oh,
running a validator on their network, and that's something that is new. And we're going to be doing a panel later on with them.
so how do you guys, like, do you guys have a big team that decides, hey, let's go with these guys? Or is it based off like users or like demand,
I think a lot of it is it's really developer driven, right?
Mhm.
So as an organization, a lot of our partnerships are focused on a couple of things. One is, like what are developers working on today? And is there an opportunity for us to play a part in that story? The next thing is really thinking about, what are the really interesting problems that are being solved in the space? And is there something that we can bring into the mix that will create an outcome that, but for our involvement, maybe would have been different or less
Mhm.
impactful? And so, like, if you look at things like the validator work that we've done, right? Whether it's Phantom, Aptos, or Eigenlayer, or any of these other protocols that we work with, running always on virtual machines
Yeah.
is something we do very well
Yeah.
all over the globe. And so that's kind of how we think about it is like, are there things that play to our strengths that we can do well? And then are there particular ecosystems or developers who are working on things where, Google Cloud's role might be differentiated or unique?
Got it. You're unfazed here by this noise. I
Very
appreciate
good. Yeah.
it. You talk about the Web3 portal. So that's something exciting that I just was reading in the news. So I read like very quickly through it, but it seems like an amazing place for people now to go. And it's almost like an app store in a sense, or what is that kind
It's
of?
yeah, really, it's a landing page, right? The goal was to create a single pane of glass for Web3 developers of all kind of stripes, veterans, newbies, et cetera, and make it very easy for them to navigate the developer experience within Google Cloud without having to go through kind of the typical rigmarole. So if I don't trust that you spend a lot of time in cloud-based portals, like what we
Mhm.
call ours Pantheon, but these consoles are massive, right?
Right.
And it's not just Google Cloud, it's, AWS and Azure, they all have their kind of corollary. And they're pretty cumbersome to navigate if you're a Web3 developer. If you go to any of these things, there's thousands of tools, there's thousands of offerings, there's
Right.
thousands of listings, and you're kind of just like trying to write the right keyword
Mhm.
to find the thing you're looking for. We realized this is kind of a silly way to do this. The portal really became a way where we took all the Web3 goodness that is in Google Cloud and we concentrated into a single space. If you're a developer, you hit that page,
Mhm.
you could see everything. You see our first party products, you see our partner offerings. So if you look, you'll see like a bunch of tiles that it's like we have Fireblocks there. We've
Mhm.
got some of the data providers. We have other folks we run nodes for, do click to deploy nodes. And so that was the goal was to create a center of gravity. Now there's also things that we can do with that are a little different. For example, you can go to that page and there's a testnet faucet for Sepolia for Ethereum, right?
Yeah,
So you can
cool.
go there and you could just drop in your wallet address and get testnet ETH deposited. And if you look at the address, because it's public,
Yep.
it's wildly popular. It's like one of these things that we didn't think about when we launched this, but we were like, what do people need? I don't know, a testnet faucet that doesn't require them to have some ETH, because that's probably the one
Yeah.
thing a new developer doesn't have is any Ethereum in their
Yep.
wallet in order to get testnet ETH. And so the portal kind of became this launch pad, not just for the stuff that we had done, but also for the new things that we'll offer in a way that I think most developers are interested in interacting with that
Mhm.
content.
Like the real world use cases. I know you just touched on a few things, but what areas, I guess, with Tezos or Sui, in terms of some of the cooler use cases that you're seeing, what you can share publicly, like what have
Yeah.
you seen that's been like really interesting for you?
Well, I think the one thing that's really important to call out, and we see this all the time, is there is an incredible amount of enterprise interest in the space still.
Hmm.
I think, after the last kind of bear market, there was this assumption that a lot of the enterprise exploration in 20 and 21 sort of
Hmm.
went by the wayside. But actually, they just became a lot more conservative and quiet about it. But
Yeah.
actually, they're engaging with us pretty frequently. And so we see a lot of the great ideas that have been out there and publicly talked about still kind of brewing behind closed doors.
Hmm.
This can include everything from some of the loyalty programs, really interesting data analytics tools, but we also see enterprises kind of leaning into some of these areas that are like the holy grail, right? Everyone
Hmm.
talks about like payments, right? Cross-border payments,
Yep.
B2B payments. And so I think that we're going to continue to see more exploration there. One of the other areas that's really fascinating is enterprises who are starting to scratch the AI itch
Yeah.
are also looking at ways in which crypto and AI go together well. So there's the Fox Verify partnership, right? That was built on Polygon, which is one of our partners. And
Mm-hmm.
that's actually a very interesting concept where you have large media corporation, you've got Polygon blockchain that can write content on a hash, then immutable ledger. And then you have this idea of, hey, like, wouldn't it be cool if we can tie back anybody licensing content to train an LLM to this verifiable database that's not able to be tampered with? So there's a lot out there, and I do think those are some of the areas where I'm most excited because they are not 50-day or 100-day projects. They are 3 to 5 year projects, but that's again where we're positioned and squared up to be very successful.
Yeah, talking about like the size and resources that Google has, and any of these other large enterprises. They have the manpower and the firepower to go out and build and take the time to do things right. Have you seen like more interest since ETH and Bitcoin ETFs have come out? Like, for me, it's like, okay, look, BlackRock's not going to be putting all this money into this, and all these big companies are not going to be putting money into this. They wouldn't spend this much time on the Hill talking about this either if it's just going to go away. And so, have you noticed that, I guess, in talking to some enterprises, like the excitement has came back a little bit?
Yeah, I think again, it kind of ties back into the education thing I mentioned earlier, which is, once something sort of captures the public imagination in a way where people start to say, like, I need to understand this, not just because I had a call with a really nice guy at Google Cloud who said that I should be thinking about crypto. And maybe that is because they have a financial advisor who says, like, hey, you should take some of this and put it into these 2 ETFs that have come out. That definitely changes the conversation because it pulls it front and center for people in a way that before it's sort of an abstract technology. And I think that's actually when you talk to most critics, particularly early on, but even still more recently, a big criticism for the crypto ecosystem was, I surf the web every day. HTTPS and TCP mean nothing to me as a general user. This feels like focusing on HTTPS, but we're talking about the Bitcoin protocol or the Ethereum protocol. But now when you've created it and you've made it real for someone, it's, in the form of an ETF as a financial product or something else, now it starts to become real and people sort of move beyond this like technical hype and they start to go, oh, this is how I can use this to make my life better. So I think that's the ETF being front and center has been a massive stimulus for people seeking out to educate themselves and then come to a conversation, perhaps at a big company that's saying, hey, we want to get involved in crypto somehow, coming with a more informed point of view.
Yeah. And I guess that word crypto is kind of like this buzzword that like people now use digital assets. Like, what is the flavor of the month? Yeah, it always changes.
I mean, I think like for us, we picked the term Web3 for our team for a couple reasons. One is there are a whole bunch of non-tokenized uses of blockchain and distributed ledgers that we lean into and that we build for, and we didn't want to exclude the developer ecosystem. But we also think that the space is also so much more than just about tokens and prices. And so like when you say crypto, I mean, when I hear somebody say crypto, me personally, I think back to like, oh, this person was raised in the trial of fire in 2015 where they lost their full net worth and then crawled their way back out in 2017. But I think when a lot of people hear crypto nowadays, it's kind of got this connotation of like, oh, it's just the focus on the assets, not really a focus on the technology. I think probably what will end up happening is if adoption continues to grow, people won't refer to themselves as like, hey, I'm a Web3 business. I think they're just going to say like, I'm a internet business, right? It's sort of like nobody says I'm an internet business anymore.
Well, it's been interesting. I talked to a lot of VCs and that's been the kind of overarching theme as well, is like, hey, we'll invest in companies that use blockchain, but like if a company mentions blockchain, they kind of like bring out a magnifying glass right away. I do think where a lot of companies will start to go, where it's like, yeah, of course we use blockchain. That's like the same way everyone uses internet now. It's like, that's what we're going to base it off of.
That's sort of our hope is to be, part of the fuel for the developer ecosystem that will drive that, whether they be at the fast moving protocols that we were talking about before this, or some of the bigger companies. It's actually kind of funny because I think that's an area where if you look at our team, because we are so forward facing, it goes a long way when you're talking to these other enterprises, because the people at these big companies oftentimes are cut from the same cloth as we are. In other words, they have their bull market, bear market experience. Right? They've been in the space on their own personally. And so when you have that kind of commonality, it's very easy to understand like, okay, my success is their success, right?
Mhm.
They have this objective. If we can build this for them, innovate with them, it's not just good for the transactional relationship of like, hey, we were able to build something useful, but it
Yeah.
actually means something for them and their organization, that their
Yeah.
team gets to grow and live another day. And I think that's what everybody in the ecosystem wants to see, is these things kind of metastasize and
Yeah.
stick around for periods of time beyond just a single cycle.
So last question, I guess, it would be around just like, is there any major challenges that keep you up at night?
I think that we still need to do, as an ecosystem, a better job of creating a safe space for new users and new developers. Like, I think that
Mm.
because people have learned the hard way in crypto for so long by dealing with the bugs or being self-taught, I think there is some credibility that goes along with
Yeah.
that. But there's also a tendency to have a little bit of arrogance about newcomers and, sort of like, oh, you guys are normies, you don't really get it. Ultimately, we need new developers. We need the people who have never heard of the word crypto or Bitcoin or
Yeah.
Ethereum to feel comfortable saying, hey, I'm going to give this a shot and build a
Mhm.
business on it or try this out. Because when they feel comfortable doing that and feel comfortable being able to ask questions, I think that's what yields real adoption.
Yeah.
And so I think, creating a space that is conducive to that, I think, is really important. And then, ultimately everyone kind of worries about, some of the more systemic issues and things around regulations and whatnot. But,
Mhm.
Ultimately, I think a lot of those things will work themselves out,
Yeah.
as they appear to have worked themselves out in some ways.
Yeah.
And
With,
so,
with any technology, I think, yeah, I'd agree with you. I think even going back to the early days of finances, like they'd use certain words like liquidity, that would like
yeah,
almost keep people that are not in the know out, and so
yeah,
there's all these different terms. And I feel like there's a sense of that within crypto, but it is a very community driven. And so as a community, is like a very broad community, I do think we will benefit if we're like sit down and answer those dumb questions that people may have.
yeah.
Because once they know, that's the biggest gap I always see, is like if someone doesn't know anything, it's very easy for them to put their hand up and be like, oh, that's fake, I don't trust it,
Yeah.
or I'm not interested, right? And so, no, it's super exciting.
Building
and,
a bigger tent, right? Like that's the
yeah.
whole point.
I love it. Well, thanks so much for coming on the Blockfield podcast, coming to the Genzio Media House here in Austin. And Rich, we finally did it, man.
Thanks for having me. This was great. A lot of fun. We should do it again.
Awesome, for sure.